Hi there VC, Steve Whitty here, again for another video. These are the reminders of my July finds. These are sort of like it's welcome to the cheap bins sort of thing. Excuse me, the beard looks a bit scruffy. So I'm not going to give much of an intro to this because I mentioned it in the first one. So without further ado, let's crack on. First album, and these mainly cost around £2, or maybe less. John Cougar, American Fool, John Cougar Mellencamp, or John Mellencamp as he is known now. This was his sort of, I think, commercial breakthrough album, particularly in the States, but it also spawned a hit single for him in the UK with Jack and Diane in 1982. Never sort of got the sort of praise in the UK, the adulation in the UK as he gets in America. I think he speaks more to America, especially small town America, as he's quite proud of being from a small town. Yeah, it is a good standard rocking album. Obviously, Hurt So Good was another big single they had it in the States as well. So, sort of happy to pick that up. Next album from the 80s. This is Roachford, his debut album. And this contained his biggest hit, Cuddly Toy, which is sort of like a mixture of rock, sort of, I'd say maybe funk in there as well. Very different at the time. He never really followed up. He did do another couple of albums in the 90s, which are worth seeking out. Yeah, again, this album turns up a lot in the cheap bins, but really pleased to have it. It sounds good. It's a nice, decent album. Got this, £2. This is Bad Company's Run With The Pack, their third album, their last album with Island Records. It's fair to say that Chris Blackwell did not really like Bad Company. He sort of had them on the label because of the Paul Rodgers and Simon Kirke from Free, and then he knew Mick Rouse from Mott the Hoople, and also Boz Burrell was in King Crimson, and they might have been on Island at the time when he was in the band. But this is just straight ahead rock. It follows the formula of the first two albums, to be quite honest. Nothing spectacular about it. And some will say it's their last good album. And obviously when the contract ran out, Blackwell didn't even bother putting the bid in. He was quite happy to let them go, even though it would financially would hurt. He thought artistically it just wasn't what he wanted on his label. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. As I said, it sort of follows the formula of the first two albums, both of which were extremely successful in the States. Interesting album I found. This is The Glove, Blue Sunshine. Now, The Glove was a side project of Steve Severin and Robert Smith. Now, Robert Smith was playing with the Banshees at the time, so there was that link there. Very. It's actually hard to describe what this album sounds like. It's not Secure, and it's not the Banshees. So they're trying to be their own thing. It wasn't that successful. I was surprised to find this in the £2 bins, but yeah, it's all right. Do have another female artist in, so I think that try and make it sound Susie S, but she's nothing like Susie. But it's not a bad album. It's worth, if you can find it on streaming sites, have a listen to it on there and see what you think. Band I'd heard of but never listened to, the Roaches. This is their second album, Nerds. Came out, I think, 1980. Yeah. I think everyone knows the first album, though I'm only aware of them for it. I've never really listened to it, but it's I actually like it. I like the title track. That's really good. Makes me want to seek out some more. I probably won't be as lucky to find it in the £2 bins, but it was well worth listening to. yeah, it was good. I found it. I actually it's an enjoyable listen. So now the next two albums I'm going to show from a band that I'd never heard of until I found them, and then I just checked out on Discogs what they were like. So the band is Starry Eyed and Laughing, British band in the 70s. This is signed to CBS label, and it describes them as country rock, psych rock, psych pop. I wouldn't say I'd cut out the psych. I wouldn't even say they're progressive. What it really reminds me of is the Byrds at their sort of mid late period Byrds. It's not bad. I mean, it's not great. Always, but it's of the two albums, this is the best, the debut. But yeah, it's good. It is very Byrds at its best. But there's some sort of like hints of country in there as well, which was sort of like the vogue. A lot of British bands were trying that. I mean, Headley will tell you that about from his collection. So that was the debut album. The second album was called Fort Tour. Again, it wasn't successful, so the band sort of split up after that. I think one of them joined up with Paul Young, formed a street band, which had a big hit with Toast, and I think then went on to join them in Q-Tips, I think. Yeah, very much the same, but the songs are not as good on here as they are on the debut. But sometimes it's worth checking out the cheap bins and just do a little bit of research before pulling the trigger. So a couple of quid, what you got to lose, and not much, to be quite honest. It's another good point to. Next, and the reason this is in the cheap bins because the record is a bit rough. It plays and could do with a decent clean. There's a couple of pops on it. It's Sugar Cubes. Life's Too Good. Sort of like their breakthrough album. Obviously Bjork would leave, I think, pretty much straight, not long after. It's got Birthday on it. Very good album of its type. Probably an album should have found seeked out a lot sooner. But yeah, good. Sort of like late 80s, or actually 90s. Yeah, it's got to be early 90s. Indie pop. That's how I would describe it. Another band, Undisputed Truth. This is their album Higher Than High. Part of the Norman Whitfield production at Motown at that time. You could do no wrong, really. Though quite a lot of the songs would cross over with the Temptations, but no, I enjoyed this album a lot. Again, another band, as I said in the other video I've just done, I'm listening to a lot of funk, really, in the last few months. So to see any some stuff like that, yeah, I couldn't say no. And then this is the Waterboys. This is A Pagan's Place. This is the album. I think the first album Carl Wallinger was involved in. I think it might be the second album. I'm not too sure. Really good album. Good bit of sort of indie rock album. And the standout track here is Red Army Blues. Really is a good one. Really is an excellent record. Excellent song. Really good song. Excuse me. Really good album. Yeah. Well worth seeking out and having a listen to. Cat Stevens' album London Half, which is Back to Earth. I think this was his final album before he gave up music for a period of time. And I think you have a look there. Ooh, there you go. You can see some of that Arabic writing. He'd already converted to Islam at this point, and I think this was sort of like Contractual album. Try saying that on a Sunday morning, just to finish off. And I think that was it. He didn't pick up a guitar for I think about 15 years. And that was that. It's not a great album. I think it's just does whiff of a bit of. I've got some songs left over, and let's put this out. But he became, he's come back. He did Glastonbury this year. His new albums, if you haven't listened to it, it's well worth listening to. It's a really good album. You don't lose it, do you? I think he just probably needed a break. If you listen to his previous albums, they were always about searching for something. He found it in Islam and decided that's what I'm going to dedicate the next few years of my life. I don't think at that point he ever thought he was ever going to come back. Like my comps, this is Garden of Delight. This is on a comp that came out on Elektra. I think 72. So you've got on here Love, Alone Again, or Bamboo, Kerner Murphy, Gulliver, Zodiac, Tim Buckley's Morning Glory's on there, Earth Opera, Incredible String Band, Delaney and Bonnie, Tom Paxton, Roxy, Lonnie Mack, Paul Sewell, read that, LaQuire, Eric Clapton's on here, Stooges, Butterfield Blues Band, Tom Rush, Bread, Rhinoceros, David Ackles, Crabby Appleton, Voices of East Harlem, and then Judy Collins closes it. And £2. I don't say no to a comp. I've probably got way too many comps from being good, but you see something like this, you just can't say no to it. So yeah, really, really good comp, well worth seeking out if you can find it. Again, most of these now 70s comps end up in the cheap bins. Lucky to find this. It's one of these records that it plays. It's not in great nick, but a couple of quid I thought I'd have it. Tracy Chapman's Crossroads, her follow up to her self-titled debut album. This is a South African pressing. And I think the problem Tracy Chapman had was how are you going to follow up the debut album. It became, because of appearing at the Mandela birthday concert, quite a really big hit for her. So it was always going to be difficult to follow the difficult second album, Syndrome. But it's a good album. It's not as good as the debut album. It's a good album, and she's managed to carve out a career. I've got a couple of her albums on CD somewhere. So yeah, really good. Chicago 5. I've got the first two albums, and I saw this, and I thought, is this teetering towards the, is it like the first two albums, or is it teetering more to the AOR slush? It's not too bad. It's still in the reign of the first two albums. I did have Chicago 4, which is the live out Carnegie Hall. It's 4-box album box. I just couldn't be doing with it. It's a lot of tuning up. But this sort of follows on from the first 3 albums, the studio albums, and it's all right. I like it. It's knowing where the cut-off point was Chicago. I enjoyed that. That was well worth having. That stayed. A band in the late 80s, Diesel Park West. This is Shakespeare, Alabama. On the Food label, late 80s, sort of indie pop. I think there was a lot of hype around them. I'm trying to think, they might have been featured on a TV program. There was a lot of hype, and trouble with bands like that have hype because they've been plugged by TV. I think people get suspicious of them, and it sort of didn't do as well as I think people expected. There's some good, you can tell the influences on here. Very sort of 60s pop on here. Sort of precursor to Britpop. Maybe they were either behind the curve or too far ahead of their time. I don't know, but it didn't last. But it's a half decent album. Find that in the £2 bins. I wasn't going to say no. Next up, Tourists. Their final album, Luminous Basement, came out in 1980. Um, Tourist. This was their only album they recorded in RCA. Um, the first two albums had built up, and the second album was quite successful. On the back, they had a couple of hit singles, big hits, top 10 singles. Their version of "Only Want to Be with You" and "So Good to Be Back Home Again." Um, Very much, even though it's got Dave Stewart and Annie Lennox, it was very much Pete Coon's band. He was the main writer for the band. Unfortunately, at the time they recorded this album, there was record company wrangles. They were on Logo Records, and then somehow ended up with RCA. They got a big budget for this record. This album was recorded at Air Studios Montserrat. Unfortunately, Pete Coons was having drug issues, and Dave Stewart commented in his biography it wasn't a happy camp at that point. Album came out. The lead single, "Don't Say I Told You So," didn't do too well. They toured the UK with its house to half empty houses. The album flopped. They went and promoted the album in Australia, and Pete Coons had an overdose, and effectively had to be flown back home to recover. And it was decided then if Pete Coons couldn't do it, the band was finished. So Dave Stewart and Annie Lennox formed Eurythmics. They stayed with RCA. Pete Coons and the bass player Eddie Chin formed Acid Drops and didn't record a thing. I think record labels saw Coons as a bit too unreliable, and unfortunately for Coons, he sort of disappeared. His sons became musicians, but he developed a drink. He developed a drink problem. He wasn't an alcoholic, I don't think, but he did drink a lot, and it was unfortunately in the late 90s he died of cirrhosis of the liver. It's not, the album itself's not bad. It's a very introspective album, very much some cries for help here. And again, we're talking about 1980 when nobody really listened when people were in trouble. You sort of pushed on the treadmill a little bit. So yeah, bit of shame what happened. I've got to get the first two albums because actually I did enjoy listening to this. Almost done. Walker Brothers, No Regrets. This is the comeback album. Came out, I think, 75, 76. And the No Regrets is the lead track, and it was the hit single, Tom Rush song. It's a great version. Scott Walker, his vocals on that is just absolutely stand out. Walker produced this album. Amazing enough, there's none of his songs on the album. In fact, there's you could hardly call it a Walker Brothers album. Gary Lee is supposed to be the drummer. He didn't play drums on the album. He did a few percussion parts, but that was about it. And the problem was, I don't think they toured. Scott Walker didn't really want to tour anymore. They couldn't follow it up. They didn't follow it up. They produced two more albums, which Walker produced, but they were starting to turn in what would become his late period solo albums, and then he just stopped. They just stopped. I think they didn't split. They just didn't carry on anymore. Great shame. It's not a great album. There's some good songs on here. I mean, obviously, No Regrets is great. It does Janis Ian's Lover's Lullaby on there, and Chris Christopherson's Got to Have You. It could. Yeah, maybe Scott Walker was looking for something at that point, and he couldn't contribute. And the final of the cheap bins is, I've got to repair the cover. This is Crisis by Mike Oldfield. Came out in 1983. Contains his last big hit single, which was Moonlight Shadow. But Crisis, he takes up side one. You've also got Shadow on the Wall, which features Roger Chapman on vocals. It's all right. I mean, you can't say no to Mike Oldfield. I think some good stuff. And at this point, I think he was at his happy place. He's having some hit singles, but he was writing some good albums that were charting. So yeah, it was good. I'm pleased I've got this. So that concludes all July's finds from the cheap bins. It's always worth having a flick through. you know, because you never know what you find. Um, as I said in the last one, if you like what you see, yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down. Feel free to leave a comment. I will get back to you. Hope you'll have a good week, VC. Whatever you do, make sure you enjoy yourself, keep spinning, and most importantly, keep on smiling.